As you can tell, it's such an honor for us to have Dr. Brooks here today, such an incredible and dynamic speaker. So thank you so much. I'll invite our panelists to go ahead and start coming to the stage while I introduce you all. Yesterday, Geshe Lobsang Tenzanegi reminded us that the unique relationship between Emory University and His Holiness the Dalai Lama is rooted in a shared vision for education. Emory's mission to mold intellect and character, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama's lifelong commitment to educating both heart and mind. One Emory initiative that deeply embodies this shared vision is the Purpose Project, our partner during this Emory Year of Compassion and an inspiration behind this topic. The Purpose Project places meaning and purpose at the heart of the educational experience at Emory. So it's a very special opportunity to have Dr. Brooks join a panel with Emory leaders who work every day to make compassion, purpose, and meaning a guiding force on campus. This panel will be moderated by Brendan Ozawa-de Silva.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Dr. Brooks. That was fantastic. Thank you all for being here. My name is Brendan Ozawa-de Silva. I'm an associate teaching professor here in the College of Arts and Sciences in the Compassion Center. It's my pleasure to be moderator for you all here today. This has been a wonderful 2 days. Thank you all for coming from many parts of the world to be here with us. I was very nervous preparing for this session. I had a lot of anxiety, which Arthur spoke about. But I had the good fortune of being able to see a preview of his slides a couple of days ago. So I had some strategies to prepare for this. I tried counting to 30, that to do part work. I really don't like journaling. But then I came to the slide about metacognitive strategy. So I realized that I need a metacognitive strategy to deal with my anxiety and nervousness. And what I eventually came up with was this, which is really the role of the moderator is kind of a nothing role when you think about it. It's you're all here to hear these brilliant people. I'm kind of like an extra on a film, and these are the leads right here. So it doesn't really matter what I do. It's their job to entertain you all and say brilliant things. And if this session goes very poorly, I'll just watch it dissolve along with the rest of you. And that worked. That made me feel better. So thank you, Wes. So that's compassion for you. I've had the good fortune of learning from Geshe Lobsang and cognitively based compassion training for 20 years. So as you can see, it's really worked. That's not a statement on the program and my teachers who are absolutely perfect. But there's a saying in Tibetan, a wise and ancient saying about learning, which is, you can't pour water into an upside down cup. And so that's me. Yeah. So as my parents will tell you. So in any case, we're here to actually discuss something very important and very serious. And Arthur, your comments and your presentation couldn't have come at a more timely moment for us. We find ourselves in what many people consider to be a crisis of mental health in higher education. And so we'll be talking about that. And that might sound alarmist, but in looking at the most recent statistics from the American College Health Association over the past year, we have, which surveys over 100,000 students from about 200 colleges across the country. We find 38% of students saying they have moderate or severe depressive symptoms. And that's as measured by the PHQ, the Patient Health Questionnaire, a validated tool. 34% saying they have moderate to severe anxiety. 13%, that's 1 out of 6 students, saying they have suicidal ideations. And all these statistics have come up by about 50% in the last 10 years. More concerning is that in terms of actually attempted suicide and deaths by suicide, some of those statistics have gone up by 100 to 200% over the past 10 years. So this is definitely a crisis. There is a little bit of good news, as those of us who teach in higher education know. Undergraduates today are much less stigmatizing towards one another when it comes to mental health issues. Only 7% of students said that they would think less of someone else who received a mental health treatment. But when students think about how they would be viewed by society in general if they were to seek mental health treatment, 41% thought that people would think less of them if they received mental health treatment. Our topic today will be to take some of the lessons that you shared with us, Arthur, and the great expertise of the people on this panel to think about what flourishing, purpose, and meaning mean, and what well-being means for us in our college campuses and in higher education. Our mandate as a Compassion Center from the Dalai Lama was to think about introducing compassion and ethics into education across all levels, including higher education. So perhaps we could start with you, Rob. You came to Emory recently as the inaugural professor, Alice Valley Endowed Chair Professor of Compassion and Ethics, in part to lead the initiation of a new field, developmental contemplative science, looking at the regulation of emotions, the finding of meaning and purpose across the lifespan from birth all the way up to old age and death. And college represents a particularly important part of that developmental trajectory. It's a time when, as we know, young people's brains are still developing. They're still developing the prefrontal cortex, which Arthur was talking about. They're transitioning from home life to going out into society. And it's a time when they are still in the process of discovering their purpose and their values. What opportunities and challenges do you find in terms of looking at this critical developmental trajectory?
Can you hear me? No. There we go. Thank you. Whoops. Well, first, I just want to say welcome to all of you with love and respect. I'm so grateful to be here. And I want to thank Arthur for opening up this topic and for Brendan's comments. As Brendan said, there's a lot of challenges of what we might think of as emotion regulation. Starting really in 2011, successively, we've seen the kinds of changes that Brendan was talking about in college student populations. And I think for those of us here, one way to think about the student mental health crisis is as a profound opportunity for rethinking the purposes of education in our time. I think, as Brendan said, we're interested in the center and more broadly in the field of contemplative science of starting to think about how we can intervene on problems like anxiety and depression earlier in development so that we could prevent and forestall problems before they snowball. And I think the period of adolescence and early adulthood is a window of opportunity. It's a greenhouse for cultivating flourishing because of what Brendan talked about and Dr. Brooks talked about the long-term development of the dimensions of the higher brain that help us to regulate our attention, our emotion, to take perspectives of others and be empathic, and to make the kinds of ethical choices that Arthur was alluding to at the end of his talk. And so I think, in some sense, if I had a wish or an audacious dream, it would be for higher education institutions. And really, actually, from preschool all the way through post-secondary education, to think about flourishing as the North Star of the modern university. It turns out that these are educable skills, and everything Arthur talked about is so important, and it's socially mediated. That is the way I learn to think about my emotions, to the way I learn how to pause, the way I learn how to become metacognitive is a social process. It's not an individualistic process. That is, for those of us who are contemplatives in the audience, we often talk about pointing out instructions that the meditation teacher gives. And I think as professors, as teachers, as parents, as community members, we're also pointing out to young people, what is the emotional life? What does it look like to be reactive versus responsive? And so I think through various enrichment activities And I'll talk a little bit later about the Art and Science of Flourishing course, which was created at 3 universities before the pandemic, at the University of Virginia, Wisconsin, and Penn State, that I hope to offer here at Emory. We've gotten some preliminary sense that through curricular offerings in higher education, and we know this also in secondary and elementary schools, we can train, we can cultivate the kinds of skills that Dr. Brooks was talking about that conduce towards a life of flourishing and well-being. The last thing I just want to say, because I thought it was so important, the idea that there are no negative, quote-unquote, emotions, is I think we can teach young people what I would think about as wise flourishing, which is actually, in my view, beyond happiness and unhappiness. It's a capacity to make meaning from, practice equanimity around, and accept the inevitable slings and arrows, the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows that life presents us with. I think what we've learned in the last 25 years, in part through the interaction of contemplative science and contemplative wisdom and modern science, is that these skills, as Arthur was articulating, are educable. And in that sense, they're a primary kind of mission, it seems to me, for educational institutions. And if we orient towards that as a kind of North Star.
Thanks, Rob. This emerging field which you're leading of developmental contemplative science would have been so useful for us when we were developing the C-Learning curriculum, and it will be useful as we continue to develop that curriculum. Arthur mentioned that most of the research we have is on undergraduates, so we don't know a lot about the emergence of emotion regulation in children developmentally and how to intervene, and thus we're in a little bit way stymied in our attempts to create developmentally appropriate interventions. We also have with us a good friend, John Lysaker, who's also a distinguished endowed chair professor here at Emory and also directs Emory's wonderful Center for Ethics. John, you have very strong opinions about the importance of values and virtues when it comes to flourishing and well-being. And that's a view that you hold in common with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whose request for us to develop the C-Learning program was to put ethics and compassion and values into education and into social-emotional learning. How do you understand the role of ethics in well-being and flourishing?
Yeah, so also it's really an honor to be here. Very much appreciated the talk, the presentation, and not just the culmination in Aquinas, but that was also appreciated. So for me, just to start with the talk, that flourishing happiness is not principally the feeling. The feeling is what accompanies the activity of flourishing or living well. And we then need to ask what the markers are of that flourishing. What are the indicators that I'm flourishing? And virtue is sort of an interesting word. We tend to think that it means just doing things for others, but it also just means a kind of excellence. And I tend to think of flourishing as virtuoso living, someone who really knows how to live well, how to be a person who can realize the good in the many interactions in which they find themselves. And that, to me, should really center the questions of virtue. And questions of virtue as matters of character. And when I say character, what I'm really thinking about is, what kind of variable are we in the world? What's it like to be us? But equally importantly, what's it like to live with us? And I love this line from Iris Murdoch. Really, your moral values will indicate the texture of your being. And what's that texture going to be like with others? And warm-heartedness has a lovely texture. And you know the warm-hearted, right? It's not just they have the value of warm-heartedness, but they inject warm-heartedness into the interactions, right, that they have with those around them. And so for me, the markers of flourishing should really be the markers of my capacity to realize the virtues in the course of my life. And I want to stress course because it's an ongoing learning process. It's not just a linear temporal process. And so the markers of my flourishing, the texture of my being, the kind of variable I am in my own life and the lives of others, I think about really predicating that on my capacity for honesty, my capacity for justice, my capacity for integrity, my capacity for care, my capacity for courage, for friendship, for hope, for trusting. My ability to do those, or my inability to do those, are for me the real answers to the question of who I am. Lots of things are throwing at me. My identities, my class location, my privileges, my ecological, environmental inheritances. But partly what's really me is how I bear them, how I undergo them, how I enact them. And so I think one of the best places to think about our flourishing is to really think, what are the virtues that indicate that I am actually flourishing, that I'm living well, that I'm a virtuoso human being, that I'm capable of being an exquisite human being that's a transformative presence in the world? And I can't imagine answering that question without looking back at a basic set of virtues, including warmheartedness. Right? We know these things are infectious when they're done well and they're powerful. So I could go on, and I had strong opinions. That's where I'll leave that.
We will go on. Say your strong opinions. And we have, of course, here with us Barbara Krauthamer, also a distinguished professor and historian, and of course, Dean of Emory College and host of the Year of Compassion this year here at Emory. Dean Krauthamer, in your role, both as an educator but also as dean, first earlier in Massachusetts and now here at Emory, you have a unique perspective on what student well-being is, what it would mean to inculcate the values and virtues that we've spoken of here in our college, and also a profound responsibility for the entire community here at Emory, students, faculty, and staff. Our colleges are not just institutions of learning, they're also homes for our students. What is your perspective on this?
First, good morning. Thank you, Arthur, for an amazing talk, and my panelists and the center and all of you for being with us this morning and sharing this. I think when I think about my leadership, the responsibility, the privilege, the challenges, the first thing that I always think about, somewhat to John's point, is who am I in that role? And one of the most important things to me is a profound sense of humility. And it's something that I try to impart when I talk to students, right? That, as John said, we're talking about the course of their experience, right? That this is just one moment being in college in what is hopefully a long lifetime of learning. And I often say to students, no one's born knowing how to be a college student, right? Your reptile brain didn't teach you how to be a college student. And of course you need to learn, right? And figure out who you're going to be and trying to approach that for students even with a sense of humility. And I think our culture, our institutions put so much pressure on our students, on our faculty, and on our staff that you have to be experts. You have to know what you're doing, right? Where you're going, why you're doing it. Why are you majoring in this? What are your ambitions? And no, none of us knew that at 18, right? And so for me, it's really important in some ways to demystify that for our students. So it's totally fine to be confused, to be anxious, to be apprehensive. That's part of the process. And so when I think about student well-being, I think that that's a really important component of what we all say and model for our students, right? That this is all a learning process. None of us has it figured out. I think for those of us who go to graduate school to become college faculty, university professors, We are trained to be experts in our fields, right? In our research areas. We are not trained to be experts in human beings, right? And we are not trained to be experts in human beings whose prefrontal cortexes are not nearly close to being fully developed. I have teenagers in my life, both as children and nieces and nephews, and I routinely say to them, you're just biologically incapable of making a reasoned decision right now. Right? Like it's not your fault, right? You are biologically incapable. And that is why this conversation is going south right now. But I try to be a little bit nicer when I say that to the college students. But again, I feel like this is your learning process. And for our faculty, what I would like, and part of one of my ambitions, right, is to make CBCT routinely available to faculty in the college. I think the Center has done a tremendous job of partnering with the medical school for the training of our medical students. But I would also love to see these resources and these ideas available to our faculty at Emory, again, to help everybody think about what it is to be warm-hearted in the classroom, right? What it is to acknowledge that our students are coming from such different personal experiences, learning experiences, that they are still learning to manage themselves as students. And so I think that's the opportunity and really the beauty of being in higher education, is creating that space for students to learn how to learn how to be themselves, learn how to be who they want to be. And I think I'll end by saying, I think one of the responsibilities of leaders in higher education is to realize that that's not just our work or our obligation, but it's really the gift that we're given to share with our students, but also to share with our faculty and staff, right? That I would like the college to be a place where our faculty and our staff feel like they can continue to learn how to be not just good teachers, not just good scholars, but valued and valuable members of our college community.
Thank you. I think I really appreciate your commitment to bringing CBCT to all the faculty and staff at Emory. I think that's worth a round of applause from me personally. I think that would be very valuable, and I really appreciate your perspective of considering the entire college community, faculty, staff, and students, because as we've heard from many of our wonderful C-Learning and CBCT affiliates in their presentations, to try to focus on student well-being while ignoring the educators who act in loco parentis in the role of a parent while our students are here would be an incomplete approach, certainly. Also, we exist in these high-pressure environments. I once asked one of my classes that I co-teach with Geshe Lobsang Tenzin on secular ethics, a 60-person class, how many of the students felt they suffered from imposter syndrome? And out of 60 students, 58 raised their hands. So that's the high-pressure environment we're in. But then I spoke to one of my senior colleagues in psychology, who's authored many books, very distinguished. I told him I was reading one of his books, and he said, that makes me so nervous. And I said, you're about to retire, and I'm so junior to you, what are you talking about? And he said, no, that only makes it worse that you're putting me up on a pedestal. For me, imposter syndrome has only gotten worse the more successful I've become. And that's actually true of a lot of people. So when you speak about humility, it really hits home. And it leads in perfectly to the question I'd like to pose to you, Arthur. In these higher pressure environments, you're at Harvard, we're here at Emory, what distinguishes healthy emotion regulation from using emotion regulation just to be more successful in the context of workaholism, in the context of just this machine of success and achievement that we're inside?
Thank you for that. And if I could summarize this great panel, I mean, I just love sitting up here with them because they took the initial question, which was one of crisis, the crisis of mental health, and they all pivoted it to an opportunity for love and compassion. And this is true. If you're in pain, don't waste it. Never waste your suffering. That's the whole point. And there's a lot of suffering, but that is the opportunity for us to actually bring people to the tools of greater enlightenment and to lift up the world. That's the opportunity. And I really, really appreciate that an awful lot. For the question at hand, what is it about the current higher education environment at a place like Harvard or Emory, elite education institutions, that make it harder? Well, there's a broader question there, which is, what is the blockage? I mean, most of you, if you're my age or anywhere close to my age, it's baffling because college was one of the best times of your life. College was, I mean, it wasn't 100% wonderful because you did have a bad breakup every Thursday, but the whole point is that you were falling in love a lot and that you were having a lot of experiences and you were making friendships that maybe even persist to this day, and something's different. And so that's one of the things that I've been thinking about an awful lot and writing about from the perspective of behavioral science. I have a book coming out next April called The Meaning of Your Life. And here's what I found over the course of that research. I'll put it this way. Young people today, especially people under 30, and most doubly especially people who are high education going toward great success, they're living in a simulation. They're not living in real life. You know, if Elon Musk at some point said, there's an 80%, he doesn't know, an 80% chance that we're living in a simulation. No, it's 100% chance that young people are living in a simulation. I mean, young people tell me today, I get up and I go to work on a Zoom screen and I talk to my friends on social media and I experience fun and progress through video gaming and I date online on an app. That's the Matrix. And okay, so what? It's pleasant, right? In that movie, The Matrix, it was pretty pleasant to be in the simulation. Here's the reason that in every science fiction film with that plot that people rebel. There's one thing in life you can't simulate. That's the meaning of life. It can't be simulated. Now, there's a whole lot of neuroscience behind that. There's a big body of new research in neuroscience about what's called hemispheric lateralization. It's a very simple idea with fancy words, which is how we get tenure. And what it says is that the two sides of the brain do different things. They do a lot of things the same too. But most fundamentally, this is the work of Ian McGilchrist at Oxford, who's a great neuroscientist. And he talks about the master side and the emissary side. The right side gives the instructions for the why questions, and the left side goes and finds the what and how to. It's the people side and the things side, the big ideas and meaning side and the go get it done side of the brain. And he's got a lot of compelling evidence that shows that's the case. When you're in the simulation, you're on the left the entire time. All of your meaning comes from the right. We're literally making it impossible through the misuse and overuse of technology and all of the technologically like parts of our culture, the hustle culture, the ambition culture, the achievement culture, which is all machine-like. It's all lump and matter. There's no love and compassion in it at all. It's all Aquinas' idols of money, power, pleasure, admiration, and honor. That's what it is. Instagram followers, you decide. And so we're going to fix this. We have to go back to life that used to be ordinary and it was in the before times. What's ordinary now is the simulation. What's extraordinary is your grandfather, who I guarantee you never went home after spending 12 hours looking at a mule's butt and said to your grandmother, I had a panic attack at work today. He did not. He also didn't say my job was super interesting or super lucrative, but his life had meaning. And so the whole point is we've taken the life out of life for these young people. Now, there's a lot of ways to deal with this, and we can be really practical about it. There should not be one smartphone in any classroom from kindergarten through PhD in America, ever. And it shouldn't be there during lunch either, because that's when you're a human being interacting with other human beings as well. We need to get back to love and transcendence, which is a real life experience, and finding calling and contemplating beauty and asking big questions and suffering the old fashioned way, because that's the life in life. And if we don't do that and we keep living in the simulation, well, woe be unto us. And many of the interventions that we're talking about here will be blocked. And I fear that a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur, for thank you for keeping on bringing us back to love and compassion and connection. Because sometimes the relationship between emotion regulation and connection is missed. Part of the simulation that we're living through and that young people are living through right now is loneliness. We live in a world where we're more interconnected than ever, and yet people are experiencing loneliness more than ever. And it doesn't seem to me like we're going to emerge out of this mental health crisis without focusing on human connection again. And Rob, you brought us to this, so I'd like to go back to that it's hard to manage your emotions and regulate your emotions when you're alone and you feel that you're alone. What is the role of Arthur, you've worked on friendship. Rob, you're a researcher on compassion. John, you're writing a book on friendship and have written on social relationships. What is the role of friendship and social connection in navigating one's emotions of loneliness and stress?
That's a great question. And before I answer it, I just wanted to say something about the world that the students live in. My experience in teaching them is we have to be honest that we bear responsibility in some indirect way for that. And there's a lot of difficult feelings about the climate crisis, so I think it's so important in this discussion to remember whatever's going on with young people today is an intergenerational crisis. And for those of us who are in our 50s or 60s, this crisis has been coming our whole life. The trust in the media, the trust in institutions of ours, all of this has been systematically eroded. And so, to be honest, I look at depression and anxiety and even some of the feelings of loneliness as a natural consequence of what's occurring in the world. And that's not that helpful to be able to find the causes and conditions for it, because as a wise Zen teacher told me, even if we didn't choose this, here we are finding ourselves responsible for how to respond to it. So I think the only response, as Arthur is saying, and Dean Barbara and others, is to try to find ways to refoster connection. And I think we heard Dr. Sonia Lubrin-Mirsky yesterday talk about her research on loneliness. One of the only effective strategies that she was aware of, and I'm not an expert in this area, is to try to get people to serve others as a way of diminishing, in my experience, the sort of afflictive self-focus that can cause feelings of disconnection, loneliness, depression, and anxiety. And I do think, as a professor and being someone in the classroom, there are opportunities for experiential learning where we can require students to go out and do things like kind acts of service to others, noticing the good in the world, walking around campus and silently generating warm-hearted feelings towards strangers. We can provide some sort of scaffolding for this. And my experience is, as Dean Barbara was saying, to emphasize to them this journey of flourishing. It's not a destination that we're beckoning to them from the other shore. It's a journey that we're walking on together in some ways. So I think we have to recreate, again, I would say, based on this panel's focus, we have to really recreate the way we do and think about education to try to help people feel that sense of belonging, inclusion, and connection to these institutions. And the last thing I just want to say on this score, I really want to applaud Dean Barbara for her vision of thinking about the whole institution. As I said, I think the problems of youth are an intergenerational problem. And there was this curmudgeon once upon a time, who some of you may know at Yale, named Seymour Saracen. And he wrote a beautiful little book called The Predictable Failure of School Reform. And the essence of that book was the uncritical acceptance of the idea that schools or universities exist for students is at the basis of why reform fails. The big idea here is, if we don't create environments for educators to flourish and grow, the chance of them creating classrooms where their students can do that is greatly diminished. So I really, I have some small ideas about this, but how do we reconnect community It's a system-wide intergenerational project. And I hope that the classes that we offer and you offer, Brendan and Geshe-la, give people a sense of that community, belonging, and meaning, hopefully right at the outset of their career, and so that we can start to make some small impact on feelings of isolation and loneliness.
I don't know if I guess I have maybe a particular thought about campus life and what is it that leads people to feel isolated. And part of it is, I think, confusion about what they're about. Where do they feel themselves? And I think friendship is so attractive because people say about their friends, they get me, or I get to be me there. I think there are different contexts where, even to our own surprise, and we learn about ourselves, where the reins kind of come off a little and we're more relaxed and we find ourselves coming into our own more. And I think one of the tasks is to create those spaces, and to create them in ways that they're not just resume lines for future jobs. I mean, I think the crisis of club culture in universities, particularly at Emory, is they're heavily policed because everyone wants a position of power so they can put it on their resume. And I wish, I have a couple friends who are childhood friends, very successful, very wealthy, commercially successful. And I just want them to come and say, no one cares that you were the vice president of the juggling club, right? It's not going to get you a job. So I think that the sort of hyper-competitive environment has colonized, the commercial competitive environment has colonized many of the social spaces, even when they're dedicated to signs of value, right? And the pursuits of value. And the second thing, and this is just, I think, a generational growth challenge, is that people were often excluded from club culture because they didn't replicate the typical identity markers. So they were excluded for reasons of race, ethnicity, class, and religion. And we've tried to build inclusive spaces around this. The risk of those is that it levels the differentiation within those groups. Right? And I remember growing up in Princeton High School. Barbara and I went to the same high school. And there were plenty of racial ethnic divisions in our school. And you would know what they were because of how lunch went. So in middle school, people interacted, they ate more together. All of a sudden in high school, lunchroom is completely balkanized. And I wasn't a particularly progressive teenager. I wasn't on top of these things. But it did dawn on me that people weren't sitting together because they all liked each other. And so something was wrong. And so we've made the move to create spaces of welcome for people across these cultural differences. But the next iteration has to be spaces where across those differences, people can continue to interact. And people have spaces when they're the outlier, even given the common identity figure. Particularly at universities, particularly at competitive universities. The kids who have grown up a little on the outside, there may be nerds, right? They may have struggled. They may be socially awkward. And the sheer fact that you share a cultural identity is not a fertile ground for an intimate friendship. So this isn't to do away with these spaces, but I think the next iteration is how to get them to interact and to free them from really resume building, which I think is turning social spaces into almost asocial competitive spaces. So that's a kind of particular reply.
We're going to have to wrap up, but I'd like to give Dean Krauthamer the last word. If I could, before we do that, Rob, you mentioned about the potential of academic courses for building social connection and what people can find in contemplative education courses. And I wanted something I learned from my good friend Jen Knox, who might be here, one of the co-developers of C-Learning, is to always try to bring student voice into the room. So some of my students are interviewing students doing a research project on student well-being, and this is from a transcript of one of those interviews. This undergraduate says, "My first 2 years, I was heavy in the pre-med game, trying to just swim through. You see the same faces again and again, and you're trying to get A's in everything. That's the one goal. I didn't feel like I was going to be a lifetime learner. I thought I was pretty exhausted by the things I was learning." The compassion course I took here at Emory changed my perspective of learning science because we sat on the floor, and that was the first time I knew who I was studying with. I knew them beyond their names and faces. When you see people and you know their life story, or just a little more than their names and majors, you feel connected with them. So that course definitely changed my perspective of learning, because I had seen it as a very chalkboard-style process. We write notes on our computer and memorize stuff back home. But this was more engaged. Let's listen to each other. Let's co-create knowledge, explore it, instead of just being on our phones or computers typing up everything everyone says. You're going to actually remember these things in life more than just regurgitating it on a test. I could use what I learned in life instead of just having it in my head and storing it. And it gave me a framework to think about even the other classes I was taking here. So it just changed the way I study and changed the way I see learning. And aside from empathy and compassion in academia, I think I started using more empathy and compassion in my everyday life. I was a mentor for research, a mentor for international students, just a mentor for anyone who needed it. And I wasn't giving what I knew to them. I was just helping them realize that they already have it. I was able to do that because I got that. Barbara, any last thoughts?
It's hard to follow up on that.
Usually that way with
It is. But this makes me think, and I think this is maybe what I will leave as sort of my last thought, and hopefully it will give you all an insight into how I approach my work as a teacher and leader. I, decades ago, had a friend who had read a book. I don't even know what she had read. And she said what she learned from it, it was a book about relationships, right? Having healthy relationships and meaningful relationships. And she said the takeaway from the book was, when you sit down at a meal with somebody, you should be able to look across the table and smile at that person and be grateful to be with them and to see, no matter who it is, right? That you should be able to look at the person that you're eating with, that you're working with, and see value in that person and appreciate that moment. And that for me really resonates with this idea of just warmheartedness. And it doesn't mean that you say yes to everything. It doesn't mean that you like everything or agree with everything, but that you see value in the people you see every day, that you're working with, that you pass on the street. And I hope as we think about values and virtues and relationships and creating space for connection, that's something that we can all bring to our daily lives, to our students, to our colleagues, and to the people we encounter.
Thank you. Amen. And please join me in thanking our extremely distinguished panelists.